Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here at the first Australia-Indonesia Business Conference to represent the Export Finance and Insurance Corporation, or EFIC. EFIC, the Australian Government's export credit agency, is a platinum sponsor of the conference. EFIC has a long history of helping Australian companies to trade with and invest in Indonesia. At the moment, we're assisting several large Australian businesses, including Thornycroft Maritime, Orica and Leighton Holdings, with finance for major projects there. As we expect growing opportunities for Australia's companies in Indonesia, the new edition of the AIBC's guide, Doing Business Indonesia, is very welcome. My formal role here today is to welcome the Minister for Trade, the Honourable Dr Craig Emerson, MP. Craig Emerson has been the member for Rankin in Queensland since 1998. After the 2010 federal election, he was appointed the Minister for Trade. Prior to that, he had portfolio responsibility for small business, competition policy, consumer affairs and deregulation. Craig holds a Bachelor of Economics with honours degree from the University of Sydney, a Master of Economics degree from the University of Sydney and a PhD in Economics from the Australian National University. He's been a postdoctoral fellow at the Australian National University and has 17 publications to his name, including a book setting out a vision and plan for Australia's future. Since becoming a parliamentarian, Craig has had more than 70 opinion pieces published in national newspapers. Professionally, he's been Secretary of a Queensland Government Department, the CEO of a Queensland Statutory Authority, an Assistant Secretary in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and an Economic Analyst at the United Nations. Craig was a Senior Policy Advisor to former Prime Minister Bob Hawke, former Queensland Premier Wayne Goss, and earlier to Finance Minister Peter Walsh. In addition to his 25 years of public policy work, he's also successfully run his own small business. If you read the newspapers, you'll have seen Craig has had a particularly high public profile in recent weeks, and I noticed in The Australian on the weekend he was described by a union leader as, quote, a well-known economic rationalist. Many of us would hope that there were more people like Craig in federal parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Minister for Trade, Dr Craig Emerson.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Yes, I've been called lots of things. In fact, I call myself an economic rationalist in my first speech at Parliament, and I was advised by colleagues never do that. I thought, oh, well, I might as well get it out now because it'll only come out later. I'd like to acknowledge a number of attendees, special guests at the Australia-Indonesia Business Council gathering today. His Excellency the Sultan of Yogyakarta. I just had a brief chat with the head of the Investment Coordinating Board, Gita Wiruwan, and also the Vice Minister for Trade, I understand, is here, and I'll try to catch you before I dash back to Canberra, Mahendra Sirigar. Obviously, Chris Barnes, the head of the Australia-Indonesia Business Council here in Australia, and Andrew Moll, and if I've missed people, it's because I've just rushed in, had a meeting and haven't had the opportunity to catch up with you yet. But I know that everyone here is important to the relationship between our two countries. And I want to speak from the heart as much as the head about that relationship. And at the outset, I'd like to pay tribute to the Australia-Indonesia Business Council for the important work that it has been doing and will continue to do in advocating trade and investment between our two countries. And I think the fact that its membership continues to grow itself is testament to the value of that relationship and especially to the potential of the relationship. The reason I say that I speak from the heart as much as the head is that during the introduction from Andrew, he may have mentioned that I studied for my PhD at the Australian National University in Canberra, and the Vice President of Indonesia was also at the ANU at around that time, and the Trade Minister, Mari Pangestu, was at the ANU at around that time and has been back many times, and I think I'll be seeing both of them later in the week. But that is just one example of the long-standing friendship and the depth of that friendship between our two countries. They weren't the Trade Minister and the Vice President of Indonesia at the time. They were like me, learning at the Australian National University. And when you think of the investments, if you want to put it in commercial terms, that can be made between two countries, there's no greater investment than those relationships and friendships between countries. And I know that I was talking to the President of Indonesia at Davos. We were at the same session, and he was saying that he sent his son to school in Western Australia. Now, these are just irreplaceable movements of people between our countries, and the affection with which they then hold Australia, and similarly when we go to Indonesia, the affection with which we hold Indonesia is an enduring benefit way above and beyond the economic relationship to develop a genuine friendship between our two countries. And that's why I think we have been very wise, our two countries, over the last 30 or so years to have such close personal relationships that now we have people in senior positions in both countries who have had wonderful experiences during their formative years of each other. So turning now to more directly commercial matters, we know that the Indonesian economy has been performing very well indeed. It's now one of the very strongest economies in our region. It's the world's third largest democracy with 230 million people. GDP growth has averaged about 6% per annum over the past 4 years, and that itself is, a remarkable achievement, particularly during the teeth of the deepest global recession since the Great Depression. And the International Monetary Fund forecasts growth even stronger than that of around 7% by 2014. We know as an economy such as Indonesia's continues to grow, then there'll be a pretty strongly emerging middle class, and that's estimated at 50 million middle-income earners. That's a lot of purchasing power. And of course, that means also, as Indonesia continues along that development path, that there'll be a real appetite for investment in infrastructure, such as roads and also power generation. So from the point of view of Australian businesses, there are huge investment opportunities in Indonesia. But that's really underpinned by the strengthening of our relationship between the two countries. Of course, the President, Widodo, visited Australia in March of last year, and our Prime Minister visited Indonesia in November of last year. And we committed during the President's visit to Australia to ensure that there are regular meetings between leaders, and that's been followed through by Prime Minister Gillard's visit late last year. We have these enduring links in education, and despite the general downturn in overseas student enrolments in Australia, a matter that does concern us greatly, Indonesian student enrolments grew by more than 3% in 2010. So there's the bright side of what's happening with our student numbers. Indonesian student numbers have actually risen. We've committed as a government $62 million to the National Asian Language and Studies in Schools program, and we've been talking about that just last week, about how important that is. We did a launch with the Australian Industry Group of a report, and it identified a fall-off, frankly, in activity here in Australia of learning languages of countries of our region, including Indonesian. And that, or Bahasa, that has actually been a source of concern for us and an area in which we need to do much more.